much for agreeing to chat to us today.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
So, mate, tell us a little bit about how you became involved with this anthology, because I've sat down and watched it, and it's absolutely amazing. So how did you get involved with it in the first place?
Well, thanks for saying that. That's really special. So I guess it harks back to 2018, really, is when, oops, sorry, I'll just turn off this thing. It goes back to 2018. There was a call out for, emerging Western Sydney writers for this initiative, and they were trying to get 8 writers to get together and create a project, basically, because, they were looking at sort of emerging voices and people that had sort of been in the industry, but not being able to work at that sort of level as a writer. I'm an actor. I mean, by trade, I've been acting for about 10, 12 years. But I sort of thought, I've been writing a little bit. I made a couple of short films and a web series, and I thought I'd enter. But I really didn't think we'd be where we are now, which is basically having opened Sydney Film Festival and then, also about to open in cinemas in about a week. So very exciting journey. I sort of got selected. I was in the room with a bunch of the 7 other writers, the producers, our development producer, Blake Ashford, and Co-Curious, the production company. And we all sort of started a journey. And, it wasn't really going to be an anthology feature film until sort of way late in the development stage. I mean, initially we were trying to make I don't even know. I mean, we thought we would just be making some sort of a web series or something like that. But I think once the producers sort of took away the scripts, just realized there was a lot of depth and it was all sort of working really well and that we have something here. So we sort of pushed for a feature film.
So you said that the anthology idea wasn't there from the beginning. So what was the initial pitch that you had to give? Was it a story about Western Sydney or characters from Western Sydney? What was that original pitch that you had to give?
Yeah, so we actually were selected on separate piece of writing. So we had to sort of send in our writing work, and what I think is really special about this project is they didn't start by picking a pitch. Like, they actually started by picking the people, and yeah. I think that's what made this project really special. They picked 8 people that they thought, these guys have something here. I mean, they have something to tell, something to say. They have stories, and they will work really well together. So it was more of like people picking, story picking, really. So we didn't have to come in with a pitch. We just had to send our own writing samples. I sent in my short film that I'd made, and basically, that's how we got selected. So when we got in room day 1, there was no story idea. There was nothing. So basically, it's all sort of original, and it all just kind of created, was created by talking and sharing stories and talking about us growing up in Western Sydney and our separate Western Sydney journeys, and it sort of just linked into this anthology film.
What was that first day like in that room? Were you really nervous going in there and meeting the other writers that would be involved with the project as well?
Yeah, look, I would say I get excited with that kind of stuff. I mean, less nervous, but more sort of apprehensive because I didn't really know what was going to happen. So I think I had really minimal expectations. I just wanted to write something, and I just wanted to expand my writing, work. And I thought I'm generally a collabby kind of person. I like collabing with people, and I was like, cool, let's see what happens. But yeah, day 1 was really intense, actually, to be honest, because there was a lot of info. And then sort of, I remember halfway through the day, my brain was just being cooked because I was like, whoa, there is so much going on. And then sort of, we just chatted a lot. There was a lot of talking. And I think I'm going to say, all credit to Blake Ashford, who was our script developer, and the producers for just letting that happen and just fostering that kind of environment, because you can get into those rooms and people can say, write this, write that, But it was very like, let's just talk and develop stories. And by day 3, we felt like we had something that we could go away and write. So then we went away and did all our individual sort of pieces.
So tell us a little bit about your piece. How did that idea come together? And then, I'm just really interested in how do you then meet with the other writers and the directors to make your piece fit in with everything else?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Basically, my piece is called Brotherhood. It's the 3rd chapter of the film, of the anthology. It's about young boys growing up in Western Sydney, their lives, their livelihoods. It's about young romance. It's about, so many things, but basically about these 3 young men who we kind of drop into a slice of their life in Western Sydney at the time, and basically they get intertwined in the larger story. And one of the characters who I play, Robbie, kind of, continues on to another part of the story as well. Brotherhood came about because we were chatting about sort of my life in Western Sydney when I was younger and I was growing up there, and, what I did with my friends, and the fact that we used to get profiled a lot, being sort of young men from Western Sydney, by the police and by sort of authority figures. And I was telling those kind of stories, and, something we see in the media a lot, I think, in Australia, and it sparked this convo and sparked this sort of these characters, and basically they're loosely based on people I sort of grew up with, and a sort of a twisted version of a younger version of myself, and then it was just a great lifeline through the film to have these boys. I think it sort of just gave the film a lot of the chapter, a lot of like sort of oomph and energy, but in terms of how sort of the collaboration worked. It was actually very difficult. I'm not going to lie. It was a really, really difficult task. I mean, this film was in development for 2 to 3 years, which doesn't sound like a long time, but for a feature. But we worked tirelessly, a lot of emailing. So basically, we went away and wrote out chapters, and then there was a second development session about 6 months later. So we all came back together, and we brought our stories back, and then we kind of really fine-tuned them. And then Blake Ashford, who was a script development producer, he went away and sort of threaded it together, and thought, just gave it some thought on how it could come together as an anthology. And then we shared notes, and basically the directors came on board quite late. So what I think is a key factor of this project is that the producers made us associate producers and gave all the writers associate producer credits. And what that did is sort of, it gave us a creative say in the film that otherwise we wouldn't have had. And that was, that's still going on now. I mean, right down to marketing. So basically from day one to to the release, we've had a creative say in some things to do with our chapters or some part of the vision, or we're always able to sort of express our opinion. And I think it's a new way of filmmaking in Australia that's very avant-garde, and I think it's actually going to change the industry. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. I mean, just open-mindedness from the producers and sort of thinking ahead and being like, we want to tell this story the right way.
What was that like for you, writing from such a personal space as well? You mentioned that the characters in Brotherhood are based on people that you grew up around, and that Robbie is kind of a younger version of yourself. What was that like, writing from such a personal point of view? It
was a little bit... it was probably two things. One was it was very freeing. And two, it was, I get a little bit daunted by that sort of idea of sharing a lot of my personal life, because I guess I've been an actor and I've always played characters, but I've never really had to expose myself like that, And I think the other thing that made me feel like that was speaking Bengali in the film. That's my language, it's my mother tongue. It's what was my first language. Albeit to say my dad and everyone was very proud watching the film and hearing the language in an Australian film. But for me, still having to write it and speak it and perform it well and, make sure that it was done properly with the, collaboration with Leah Purcell, the director, and make sure that the edit was right with it. All that stuff can be very daunting, and you can feel like the community is sort of like hanging on and we're going to watch it. And, there's all this kind of pressure, the external pressure. So, yeah, it's two things. But then at the end of the day, I feel like it's the most liberating role I've ever played, because it just sort of, now I feel like I can do whatever, because it just freed me up. Like I've spoken my language in an Australian film. Actually the voice of my mum in the film is my actual mum. Yeah. So she did the temp sort of voiceover, and then they liked it so much that we just sort of ended up getting her in the studio and doing it properly. So that's a really special thing for me as well. Something that'll always be there. So yeah, I think it's two things. I think it's, on one hand, it's freeing, and on one hand, it's kind of daunting to write such personal stories, and then to perform it as well. But yeah, look, I think it went as well as it could have.
You mentioned there, speaking Bengali was so special for you in an Australian film. It's also a very big part of the second chapter that Robbie appears in. Tell us a little bit about how that came about, that your character is in a second chapter as well. Was that something that was talked about in that room in one of those meetings?
So, no, it wasn't actually. I mean, not initially, but by the second development session, it had sort of come to fruition. But I won't speak for Beena, who's the other writer of The Eternal Dance, but I'll just say that she she told me that she basically had a moment where she went away after, I think it was day 2 or something, and she went away and thought, because she had this story about because we'd never met each other. So she'd come into this room. She's half Bengali, and she had this story about a mixed race Indian Bengali woman who basically couldn't speak her language, and her dad was on his dying bed and could only revert to his original language because of dementia. And so she was pitching this story in the room, or talking about the story in the room, and I'd already talked about my character, and I think she went away and had a braingasm, and she was basically like, here's this sort of young Indian woman who's like a punk, doesn't care, and then she meets this younger guy who's actually in tune with his language and in tune with his heritage, and it's kind of like a reverse on what would happen in other stories where you'd see the older person sort of helping out, with the language and stuff. So she just had this moment, and it just kind of worked, and I think she went away and we worked out that she needed help, and, I won't give too much away, but obviously they come into each other's lives, and they help each other. So yeah, it happened by, organically, I would say, which is really special thing, because I think any of these little moments in films that happen organically end up being the sort of stronger bits,
Definitely. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit as well about working with Leah Purcell. How did that come about? Did she pick your segment of the film to direct, or did you pick her as director?
A little bit of both, but what I know is that their producers approached a bunch of directors, and ones that they thought would be the right ones for the project, and gave them all the stories and gave them the whole script. Which we did have an entire feature film script. It was just broken into chapters, and basically I heard that she resonated with my chapter and the closing night, the last chapter of the film, the most. And she told me why. I mean, we chatted really a lot actually in the early days, just to talk about what the project was going to be like and what my vision was and what her vision was. And the reason she sort of resonated with brotherhood so much was because she grew up with 3 brothers. And she said, I grew up in the block with 3 brothers, and it really took me back to my childhood, and, the idea of sort of masculinity and why sort of certain men from different races are viewed in a certain way in the media and all this kind of stuff. And she really connected to that. And she grew up in the inner west, so she kind of knew of Western Sydney and been out there a lot. So she was really, she was able to really switch into that world. And she just got it. She got the idea of language, and she got the idea of these 3 boys who were best friends but had trouble with each other, and also how they were actually quite soft and sensitive on the inside but hardened on the outside, we just had these kind of chats, and I think she seemed to just sort of naturally pick it. But then I was just very happy with having her on board. I mean, she's a powerhouse of a creative, so and I also loved having an Indigenous director do my piece. I think that's really special for me too, because I think far often we always sort of hear that Indigenous storytellers tell their own stories, but I think it's also really special that they get to tell other stories, and
Definitely.
Especially immigrant stories. I think they can tap into that world too really well, and vice versa. I would say going ahead. So I think it's a really nice collaboration. I think it came together really well.
It did. Now, Arka, I know we are running out of time very, very quickly, but before we go, I'd just like to ask one quick question. How do you feel now that the film is about to be released in cinemas, and what would you like to say to people before they go into a cinema to watch this amazing film?
I honestly just want to say, well, firstly, I feel really excited. I feel really relieved as well that it's actually coming out now. And I have some jitters for sure. I have some butterflies in my stomach. I think we all do as a part of the creative team, because, the real test is whether people will go out and actually watch it. People can talk about it all they want, but really people need to go and watch it to support it. And I think that's the thing with movies, is that the only way you can feel supported is people actually watching it. So I'd just like to say this film is for everybody. It's not just for people from the West. It's not just for immigrants. It's not just for people of color, or it's not a niche film on the side of the street. I think it's a Australian film. It's a special modern Australian film, and I really think that people should go and embrace that. And it's coming out in a lot of cinemas. It's getting quite a wide release, so especially in New South Wales and Victoria. And I would just say for Australians around to just give it a shot and go out and watch it. And I think they'll be quite sort of pleasantly surprised at how much they can relate to it, from all ages and all parts of the country. And also, global audiences, I think, would be able to really relate to it too. So, yeah, I just hope that people get to see it. that's my hope.
Definitely. Well, Arka, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today. It's been an absolute privilege chatting to you, and I can't wait to see what the next film is that you work on as well.